So every year at the end of the year, I update a few of my videos, my favorite series, favorite standalones, and favorite authors. And this year, I have a lot of things that I'm doing in December for my end of the year videos. So December is booked up. So these are going in November, which is fine because it's not like my favorite of the year, least favorite of the year, stuff like that. All of that is saved until the absolute end of the year. So no worries there. This is just like my top list as of right now. But before we get into all of that, a word from our sponsor. Do you ever stop what you're doing and think, man, I wish I was a famous author, but I can't because I'm really bad at writing? Well, I have some good news for you. Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with more than 25,000 classes in marketing, business, and way more. Premium membership gives you unlimited access to all of the classes so that you can learn more about all of the things that you're currently really bad at. An annual subscription with Skillshare is also less than $10 a month, and considering the number of classes that gives you access to, it's a pretty awesome deal. Also, if you use the link in the description of this video, you'll get a 2-month free trial. I personally use Skillshare for language. I've used it for learning how to read faster while maintaining my comprehension, but there are classes for just about anything. Highly recommend at least just go check it out. The link is in the description. So, favorite authors list. I have my top 5 authors for this list, and I'm going to start with my number 5 top author, and that is Isaac Asimov. So Isaac Asimov is an author that I only just discovered in the last few months, and I've only read 3 of his books at this point. I'm going to be reading another one this month. Isaac Asimov is only at the bottom of the list at this point because of how few of his books I've read and because I don't think I've gotten into his best books yet. I'm still working on his robot and detective mystery series, which isn't the type of series that I tend to love, but it doesn't matter because it's Isaac Asimov. I have no doubt in my mind that he is going to raise high in this list as I read more of his work. I really like his writing, I love his world building, and his use of AIs are brilliant. So Asimov is the one that created the laws of robotics that a lot of sci-fi movies and novels use now. And he did, like, first of all, the laws of robotics that he created, so good. But then he creates ways around them that are just genius. In each of his books, you find these 3 laws that feel so solid, and then you find ways that people or robots have worked around them and created mayhem because of it. The personalities that he puts on these AIs are so interesting and make me want this world to be real so bad, but then the chaos that he creates, the problems that he creates within his world are so interesting, and solving it and figuring out your way around it with the characters is so much fun and so engaging. I also just read a book, The Naked Sun, that deals where we actually leave Earth and go into another planet, so we also deal with aliens and different life forms and species and different cultures, and that was so good too. His world building is phenomenal as well when you create a whole new culture, not just adding something very intricate into our culture. He just does such a good job, and he's an author that I cannot wait to read more from. Next author that I'm going to talk about is Neil Gaiman. So I think I've read 3 of his books at this point, and oh man. Neil Gaiman is one of those authors where he writes his stories in such an intricate way that the little details by the end are so important, and he's clearly put so much care into his story that he's left little things all throughout it that all tie together in the end. And that is just one of my favorite things to read. I guess I'll put this here and be like a good book reviewer. Anyway, I really like his writing style. He has a writing style that's almost lyrical without being overly flowery. He chooses the wording that he chooses a lot of times will cut through the page straight to my heart. There was one scene in Neverwhere, I believe it was Neverwhere, where he describes a fear of heights / a fear of falling, and he describes it in a way that I've never heard it described, but described my fear so perfectly that it almost made me scared just reading the book. Which I don't feel like I get scared reading books very often, but the way he described this simple and Fairly Common Fear, he did it in a way that was like, yes, that is it. That is what I'm afraid of. I've very rarely experienced that where it feels like someone's describing my fears so perfectly that it makes me afraid. Not just are his stories amazing, but his writing style, I think, is really just brilliant and technically gorgeous. He does such a good job. He's such a talented writer, technically, as well as a phenomenal storyteller. But also, he's one of the best audiobook narrators I've ever listened to, which is just crazy to me because that's such an entirely different skill set, but he has all of them. It's really hard for me to read his books physically because I know that his performance will make the stories come alive. It's very rare for me to listen to an audiobook narrator and think I'd rather listen to the audiobook than the physical because their performance will make the book come alive more than my mind can make it come alive. That's not a common compliment I dish out. He's one of those narrators. And it's not even his main job. Next is A.S. King. So she's kind of tied with Neil Gaiman in my book. I don't know really who should be ranked higher than the other. A.S. King is another author that I haven't read enough of her books yet. I really need to pick up more. But one book that I own of hers is Everybody Sees the Ants. I've read a couple of her books, and she's an author that I have an interesting relationship with because she works in surrealism, which I guess Neil Gaiman works in some surrealism as well, but she likes to create contemporaries that have a small magical element woven in it, and it doesn't really work in the contemporary setting, but she kind of just acts as if it's normal. I'm not a fan of surrealism at all. And so I have a weird relationship with A.S. King because she writes these hard-hitting contemporaries that are my favorite in the contemporary genre. I love contemporaries that explore really deep, difficult subjects, but she also does this surrealism that I don't like. And so I have this weird relationship with her books where it's like she does this thing that I love so well, and it always hits me hard, and I love her books so much, but then she also does this other thing that I don't like, and I oftentimes will even skip over, and I don't really skip things in books that often. But hard-hitting contemporaries are some of my favorite books to read, and she does them extremely well, so she makes the list. I guess I forgot to mention, and I should go ahead and mention right now, one qualifier that I have on this list is I'm only talking about authors that I've either read multiple standalones by them or multiple series by them. If I've read multiple books in only one series but never branched outside of that series, I don't count them on this list, which is the only reason that Scott Lynch is not on this list because I love this series so much, but he's also only written this series, so I don't feel like I can put him on this list, but he deserves to be here. Okay, so next author is going to be Brandon Sanderson. If you watched my favorite series video, Stormlight, the Stormlight Archive, made the list, so I'm pulling Mistborn for this list. I have not read all of Sanderson's books, but I have reread most of the books that I've read by him. Brandon Sanderson primarily writes high epic fantasy, but he has also delved into sci-fi recently, and those books are also fantastic. Sanderson's writing style is interesting in that he has almost a bland writing style. He doesn't really have any sort of floweriness or prettiness, and which is fine by me. I'm actually really comfortable with just straightforward writing, but that's a pretty big turnoff for a lot of people with Sanderson. But his worlds are giant. His magic systems are intricate, yet super easy to wrap your head around. And his characters, in my opinion, are incredible. A lot of people don't like the character work in Mistborn, which this is one of his first novels that he wrote, which is fine. Live your life, feel what you feel. But I will say that if you didn't love books like the Mistborn trilogy, Elantris, Warbreaker, I think before you give up, you should try the Stormlight Archive. It's, I think, Sanderson at his best. But I really haven't picked up a book by him that I thought the characters fell flat. I think that he does a really good job at building a lot of emotion, and he portrays emotion extremely accurately. Sanderson really likes to work in a lot of mental health stuff. He portrays depression, PTSD. There's even some multiple personality disorder in one of his books or series. He he spends a lot of time working in these real life things and doing it in such a natural and accessible way. And because he depicts, and grief, he spends a lot of time on grief. Because he depicts these themes in such an accurate way, it sometimes can almost, for me, grate on me in a negative way, because it's like, I get tired of being in the head of this, but it's so accurate that it's also so relatable. Don't know how to describe it. But my favorite thing about Sanderson is his stories. I love his world building, I love his magic system, I love his character work, but the plots that he makes are so good to me. It's actually really interesting because I think my favorite thing about Mistborn is the plot, but my favorite thing about Stormlight is actually the characters. But he's also one of those authors that really, you can tell he's thought the story all the way through, and he leaves these little moments all throughout the book that end up tying together at the end that just make you go, holy cow, all these details really did matter. He's not everybody's cup of tea, but he definitely is mine. And the top author on my list, my #1 favorite author, is Fredrik Backman. I have read 4 of his books now. Yeah, that sounds right. And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer is my favorite of his so far. Fredrik Backman also writes these hard-hitting contemporaries like A.S. King, and I don't think anyone in the world could do a better job than him. I could be proven wrong. I hope I am. I hope I will forever find authors and books and series that I love more than the last one. But as of right now, Backman is it for me. So Backman writes, oh man, okay, he writes hard-hitting contemporaries. This book right here is about a grandpa who is losing himself within his dementia, and then also his son and his grandson, and you get all 3 of their perspectives as this is happening. It's a tiny little book. It's, how many pages are you? 76 pages. I actually listened to this the first time on audiobook, and I, by the end, was crying so hard that I had to rewind and listen to the ending 3 separate times because I kept missing the final lines because I couldn't hear it over my sobbing. And let me tell you, I really don't cry very often when I read, but Backman, he does it so often. He writes difficult stories dealing with difficult emotions, and he does it, his writing style, he writes in a way that he takes a simple concept but then changes the wording just a little bit that makes the words cut through to my heart. Much like what I said about Neil Gaiman, but on a much higher level. He will take these simple concepts that we've discussed to death, and then he'll word it slightly differently and suddenly give a brand new perspective or add clarity that you didn't know was needed. I'm actually currently reading a nonfiction of his, so pretty soon I'll have read one more of his, but you know, I haven't finished it yet. His books are also translated for me. He writes in, pretty sure it's Swedish, but I don't want to be wrong. Hang on. Lives in Stockholm, Sweden. So he's fluent in English, but he writes in his native language, and his books are translated into English. And to me, not only does that say a ton about Fredrik Backman, that his books can be so impactful despite them being translated, but it also says a lot about the translator that he works with does such a good job that he can keep the impact of the sentences having to completely reconstruct them in a different language. Okay, so that was a lot of talking for five authors, but yeah, those are my top 5 authors. I hope my list changes again next year, just like it did this year. Be sure to chat with me more about any of these books or talk to me about your top 5. I post videos every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.